When I noticed my husband flipping through my phone, my heart skipped, not because I feared being caught, but because I knew what he was about to find. Those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he quickly jerked it back, his eyes glued to the screen. I watched his face change as he read, each line distorting him more and more, and I felt my life unraveling in those few seconds. Yes, he was about to find out everything. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he flipped through the messages, and I knew he was about to reach the one that would destroy everything. The one that would explain it all, or perhaps confuse him even more. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in his hands, an incoming notification lighting up the screen. I watched as his face drained of color when he saw the sender's name. My husband froze. Not even a blink. I bit down on the inside of my cheek, a nervous habit. My nerves tangled with the cold dread of what I had done. His breathing quickened. I could hear it from 2 meters away. This was it. This was exactly what I had feared most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake. The kind of mistake that changes everything, forever. And now. I didn't know what to do, but let me tell you how it all happened. Before I share with you the secret I've been trying so hard to hide, tell me where you're watching this from and if you've ever had a secret that you tried to keep hidden, but in the end, you couldn't. The mornings have always been the same in our house, like clockwork. I wake up early, long before he does, and prepare breakfast. The same routine: eggs, toast, coffee, nothing extravagant, just the kind of meal he likes. It's a simple gesture, one that has become almost mechanical over the years. And yet, no matter how much effort I put into it, I'm never certain if he even notices. He's always too focused on his phone, his newspaper, or the endless stream of work emails he checks before he even sips his coffee. I glance at him, as I always do, hoping for something. Maybe a look, a compliment, or just an acknowledgement. But it's like I'm invisible. His eyes meet mine for a brief moment, and then they're back on the screen. That's how it always is. He never really sees me. Not anymore. The days blend together in this house. I don't mind the silence, I've grown accustomed to it, even if it's deafening at times. The routine is comforting in its predictability. But sometimes, I wonder how long I can keep pretending that I don't mind the void between us. When my husband tells me his son is coming to stay with us for a while, I don't protest. I don't even feel any particular emotion about it. It's just one of those things. Our home isn't particularly big, but it will have to do. His son, from a previous marriage, has been staying with friends for a while, and now that his apartment fell through, he's coming here. I smile politely, nod, and say, of course, it will be nice to have him. But inside, I feel a strange unease. I don't want to admit it, but I know why. It's the same reason I feel uneasy every time something changes. The reason I've become so good at hiding my own emotions. I don't want anyone to know how much I crave connection, how much I long for something, someone to truly see me, to notice me. It's been so long since I felt that way. The first night he arrives, I watch him settle into the guest room. I try to make myself comfortable, act normal, but I feel a shift. There's something in the air. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the fact that someone new is in the house. But I feel something inside me stir, something I haven't felt in years. I catch myself stealing glances at him, at his posture, the way he moves through the house. There's a confidence in him, a self-assuredness that seems to cut through the space like a knife. It's strange. He's not a boy anymore, but he still carries an innocence with him, a certain kind of youthful naivete that I can't help but notice. But I'm careful not to linger on it. It's a fleeting feeling, one that I quickly suppress. I make dinner that night, something simple. We sit at the table and the conversation is, as expected, strained. It's polite, but there's a wall between us. A tension I don't know how to ease. Later that evening, after dinner, I find myself sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine. The silence hangs thickly in the room. My husband is in the other room, typing away at his laptop, and his son is reading in the corner. I glance over at him and catch his eyes for a moment. There's something in his gaze. I can't quite place it, but it's unsettling. I look away quickly, pretending I didn't notice. But that look lingers. The next morning, I wake up earlier than usual. The sun hasn't fully risen, and the house is still quiet. I go into the kitchen, start the coffee machine, and set out the dishes for breakfast. When I turn around, I see him, my stepson, standing in the doorway. His hair is messy from sleep, his eyes still half-lidded, and he's wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants. "Morning," he says, his voice hoarse. "Morning," I reply, offering a smile. He rubs his eyes, and for a moment, I see him as a child again. It's strange, how easily I can forget that he's grown up, that he's no longer the shy little boy I remember. He stands there for a moment, almost as if unsure of what to do. Then he asks, "Do you need help with anything?" I shake my head, but before I can say anything else, I feel a sharp pain in my neck. It's that dull, familiar ache that's been bothering me for weeks now. "Actually, could you?" I trail off, suddenly feeling embarrassed. He steps forward without hesitation. "I can give you a quick massage, if you want." I look at him, unsure of how to respond. It's a simple offer, one that doesn't mean anything, but in this moment, it feels different. The air shifts. My breath catches in my throat. "Sure," I say softly, trying to sound casual. But my voice trembles slightly, and I'm not sure if he notices. He moves behind me and places his hands on my shoulders. I feel his fingers press into the knots in my muscles, the tension melting away with every slow movement. For a moment, I close my eyes, letting the sensation wash over me. I hadn't realized how much I missed the feeling of someone's hands on me, the warmth, the pressure. But then, as his hands move lower, something shifts. A strange feeling coils in my stomach. It's not discomfort. It's something else. Something I don't want to acknowledge. His hands move with practiced ease, his touch lingering in places it shouldn't. I try to push the thought away, but it's difficult to ignore. I feel a heat rising in my cheeks, a warmth that has nothing to do with the touch on my shoulders. I force myself to take a deep breath, to steady myself. "That's enough," I say quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you." He pulls his hands away quickly, and I can feel the space between us grow, even though nothing has changed. As he walks back to the other room, I stay frozen in place, unsure of what just happened. I don't know what this is, I don't know why I'm reacting like this. But I know one thing for sure, I can't ignore it anymore. The day after, things feel different. The morning air is cooler, a breeze coming in through the half-open window, but it doesn't bring relief. Instead, it only adds to the tension hanging in the house. I go about my routine, trying to focus on the small things, the familiar motions that should ground me, but I can't shake the feeling of his hands on my shoulders, the pressure of them, the heat that spread through my body in that brief moment. It's a sensation I've been trying to push aside, something I'm not sure I want to understand, but it won't go away. The house feels emptier now, quieter, even though the three of us are still here. My husband is in his study, working as usual, barely looking up from his laptop. He only speaks to ask about the bills or to remind me of something trivial. I give him the answers he expects, not thinking much of it, but inside, I feel something starting to slip. There's a distance growing, not between him and me, but between me and the world around me. It's like I'm slipping into a fog that's getting thicker by the hour. Later that afternoon, I find myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. My mind is elsewhere, swirling in a mess of thoughts that I can't seem to organize. I'm suddenly aware of his presence behind me. It's subtle, the way he moves closer, but it's enough to make my heart beat a little faster. I glance over my shoulder and catch his gaze. He doesn't say anything, but I see the same look in his eyes from this morning. It's that quiet curiosity, that searching, but also something else, something I can't quite place. I was thinking, he starts, his voice softer than usual, maybe we could go out tomorrow? Just the two of us, get some fresh air. His words catch me off guard, and for a moment, I don't know how to respond. Is this him trying to fix something? Does he sense the distance I feel between us, even if I've never said a word about it? Or is it just another casual offer, like the countless others he's made over the years, nothing more than a fleeting thought? I nod slowly, forcing a smile. That sounds nice. We haven't done that in a while. I can't tell if he's relieved or if he's just humoring me. Either way, the moment feels strangely detached. There's no warmth in it, no genuine enthusiasm, just the routine motion of words. Later that evening, after dinner, the house settles into its usual quiet. The sound of the television hums in the background, but I can barely hear it. My husband is engrossed in some documentary about historical figures, the kind of thing he watches to unwind, and I'm left with my thoughts. I've become too aware of everything. The way my stepson sits a little too still on the couch, his posture just a bit too perfect. The way he glances at me when he thinks I'm not looking, those fleeting moments where I catch him studying me in a way that makes my skin tingle. I try to dismiss it, but it's there, lingering. The tension is in the air, subtle but palpable. It's not something I can explain easily, but I know it's growing. It's building between us, like a current running just beneath the surface, invisible yet undeniable. Around 10 o'clock, my husband excuses himself to bed. He's always the first to go, his routine as predictable as ever. I don't know what makes me do it, but I follow him to the bedroom. I stand in the doorway for a moment, watching him undress, his back to me. There's something strangely detached in the way he moves, like he's unaware that I'm there at all. I'll be there in a minute, I say, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. He doesn't respond, just nods and slides into bed. His presence doesn't feel like a connection anymore, but more like a distant memory. I stand there for a moment longer, then turn to leave. As I do, I almost bump into my stepson, who's just come down the hall, his footsteps light on the hardwood. Sorry, he says quietly, his gaze dropping immediately. I force a smile. It's fine. Just getting ready for bed. He nods, but his eyes linger on me for a second too long, and that's enough to make the air feel even heavier. He doesn't say anything else and walks past me without looking back. I stand in the hallway for a moment, unsure of what to do with myself. The quiet in the house feels suffocating now. The walls seem to press in on me, and the silence has taken on a weight that I can't escape. I go back to the living room, but I don't turn on the lights. I sit in the dark, the glow of the TV the only thing illuminating the room. I don't know how much time passes, but I eventually hear footsteps again. This time, they're coming from the kitchen. I don't move, don't make a sound. I just listen. It's him. His presence in the room is unmistakable. It's not the sound of someone just walking through, but the way he pauses, the way the air shifts when he enters. It's almost as if he's aware of my every movement, even in the dark. He doesn't say anything at first, and I don't either. We just stand there, both of us feeling the space between us growing smaller, but neither of us willing to cross the line. Finally, he speaks. I didn't mean to make things weird this morning. His voice is steady, but there's a hesitation in it. I turn to face him, the dim light catching his eyes. It's fine, I reply, my voice barely above a whisper. It was nothing. But even as I say it, I know it wasn't nothing. It was something. It was everything. And I don't know how to deal with it. He stands there for a moment, and I can see the indecision in him, the hesitation, but he doesn't leave. He doesn't step closer, but he doesn't step away either. He's caught in that same web I feel myself tangled in. He stops himself, runs a hand through his hair. I don't want you to think I don't let him finish. I know what he's trying to say. The words don't need to be spoken for me to understand them. I know, I say softly. It's fine. There's a long pause before he finally moves, turning to leave. But as he walks past me, he doesn't look back. His presence lingers in the room long after he's gone, and the silence that follows feels deeper than before. I don't go to bed. I stay in the living room, my thoughts swirling around me like a storm I can't escape. I feel his presence everywhere now, in every corner of the house, in every moment I'm alone. It's there, constantly. And I can't tell if it's pulling me closer or pushing me away. But one thing is certain, something has changed. Something is broken. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what I want anymore. I only know that whatever is happening between us, it's real. And it's impossible to ignore. The next few days pass in a blur, each one seeming to stretch on longer than the last, but nothing changes. The house, once a place of routine, has become a strange and uncomfortable space, filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. I find myself walking through it, as if I no longer belong, like a ghost in a home that was once mine. The air is thick with tension, but no one acknowledges it. My husband still drifts through his days, buried in his work, too absorbed to notice the subtle shift between his son and me. Or maybe he does notice and chooses to ignore it, just like everything else. I can't tell anymore. His silence has become more pronounced. He no longer asks how my day was or if I need anything. He simply exists in the same room as me, but it feels as though we are on different continents, separated by invisible walls. My stepson, on the other hand, has become more present. He lingers in the house, more so than I ever remember. There's a quiet intimacy to it, a closeness that doesn't need to be spoken. He's there, in the kitchen when I make breakfast, in the living room when I sit with my book. He seems to be everywhere, and I can't decide if it's comforting or suffocating. One morning, I wake up to the sound of him making coffee in the kitchen. It's a small thing, but it's enough to make my heart race. I wasn't expecting it, this sudden shift in our dynamic. He's no longer just the quiet presence in the background. He's become someone I notice, someone I pay attention to in ways I never did before. It's unsettling, this awareness that's creeping in, and I try to push it away, to pretend it's just a phase. But it's not. I can feel it. It's real. I step into the kitchen, the smell of coffee greeting me before I even enter. He's standing by the counter, his back to me as he stirs the coffee, and for a moment, I just watch him. There's a casualness to the way he moves, a relaxed ease in the way his hand grips the mug, the way he pauses to take a breath before continuing with his task. I can't help but notice how much he's grown, how different he is from the boy I remember. The boy who used to shy away from me, who barely spoke unless spoken to. Now, he's taller, more confident, and his presence seems to fill the room. His body language tells a story that words cannot. And I can't deny that I've started to notice it, to pay attention to every subtle gesture, every shift in his demeanor. I clear my throat, trying to break the silence that hangs between us. You didn't have to make coffee, I say, my voice quieter than I intended. I immediately regret it, the words feeling like a clumsy attempt to break the tension, but it's too late to take them back. He turns around, and for a brief moment, our eyes meet. It's a look that lingers, a shared understanding in the silence. I didn't mind, he replies. His voice is calm, but there's something in it that I can't quite place. Something that makes my pulse quicken, just a little. I nod, unsure of what to say next. There's nothing left to say, not without acknowledging the unspoken things that hang between us, the things neither of us wants to confront. So, instead of saying anything more, I sit at the table and pour myself a cup of coffee. I take a sip, the bitterness spreading across my tongue, and I try to focus on the taste, anything to distract myself from the way my thoughts are spiraling. But it's impossible. As the days go by, it only gets worse. The distance between my husband and me continues to grow, and the distance between me and my stepson is no longer something I can ignore. I catch myself watching him more than I should, noticing the way he carries himself, the way his eyes seem to linger a little too long when they meet mine. It's subtle, but it's there. And every time it happens, it feels like a spark in the dark. A flicker of something dangerous, something I don't want to acknowledge but can't ignore. It's late one evening when it finally happens again. My husband is in his office, buried in paperwork, as usual. He hasn't spoken more than a few words to me all day. My stepson is in the living room, watching television, the glow of the screen casting strange shadows on his face. I try to keep my mind occupied with household tasks, but it's getting harder to concentrate. I find myself wandering into the living room without meaning to. I stop in the doorway, watching him as he sits on the couch, his legs stretched out, his eyes fixed on the screen. There's a certain stillness to him, a quiet concentration that draws me in. For a moment, I forget everything, my husband, my responsibilities, the tension that's been building for weeks. And then, he looks up. His eyes meet mine, and the air shifts again. It's like a spark, an electric current passing between us, and I freeze. His gaze holds mine, steady and intense, and I feel it, the weight of it. It's a simple look, but it's heavy with meaning, with something unspoken, something neither of us can name. I'm the one who looks away first, my breath catching in my throat as I try to steady myself. I don't know why I feel like this, why every time he looks at me, my heart starts to race. It's not supposed to be like this. He's just a kid, my stepson. But there's something about him, something about the way he's grown up, that has started to affect me in ways I can't control. I turn and walk back toward the kitchen, trying to put some distance between us. I don't want to be near him right now, not with the thoughts that are running through my mind. But even as I try to focus on the task at hand, I can't shake the feeling that something has changed. That something has shifted, and there's no going back. The house is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. The kind that's thick with anticipation, with the promise of something unspoken. And I know, deep down, that I can't ignore it any longer. Something is happening, something I can't control, and it's terrifying. But at the same time, it's inescapable. I just don't know where it's going to take me. And that uncertainty is what scares me the most. The following days took on a strange rhythm, one that didn't follow the usual patterns of our household. It was as if the silence between us, as me, my husband, and his son, wasn't just silence anymore. It had a presence, a density, something that filled the room before any of us walked in. It hovered in the spaces where conversation should have existed and crept into the pauses that once felt natural. I began waking up before the alarm. Not because I had anything pressing to do, but because my mind wouldn't rest. I'd lie there, eyes open in the early light, listening to the sounds of the house breathing. The creaks in the floor, the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the distant sound of a car passing by. I became hyper-aware of everything. The small details. The mundane noises. The proximity of another presence on the other side of the wall. My husband had started going into the office more frequently. I didn't ask why, and he didn't offer an explanation. It wasn't like him to leave early, to come back late, but I welcomed it in ways I didn't admit out loud. When he was gone, I didn't have to pretend as much. I didn't have to watch myself so closely. I didn't have to manage my every expression, every movement. The day it rained was when I felt the weight of everything hit a new intensity. I had been out in the backyard, collecting the cushions from the patio chairs when the rain started. It came quickly, sudden and sharp, like it had been waiting for the exact moment I was furthest from shelter. By the time I rushed back into the house, I was soaked, my hair clinging to my face, my clothes heavy against my skin. I left the cushions near the door, pushed my wet hair back, and walked barefoot through the kitchen. The floor was cold, the air inside even colder. I was just about to head upstairs when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw him standing there. He had come into the kitchen through the other entrance, holding a towel in one hand. He must have seen me through the window. He didn't speak. He simply offered me the towel, his expression unreadable. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react, but then took it from him and began drying my arms. There was something about that moment, the way he looked at me, the way his eyes moved over me, not with judgment or discomfort, but with quiet recognition. As if he saw me. Really saw me. Not as someone older. Not as his father's wife. Just me. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. He nodded slightly, like he understood that too, and then turned and walked out of the room. I stood there for several minutes, unmoving, the towel still in my hands, water dripping softly onto the tile beneath me. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight. I wasn't sure if it was because of what had just happened or because of what I knew it meant. That night, I avoided the living room. I made dinner without speaking. My husband had already texted earlier in the day that he would be staying in the city. A networking event or something equally vague. I didn't press for details. I didn't care. The absence gave me space, but space wasn't what I needed anymore. What I needed was clarity, and that was the one thing I couldn't seem to find. I ate at the table alone, slowly, trying to focus on the texture of the food, the sound of my fork against the plate. When I finished, I left the dishes in the sink and walked outside. The rain had stopped. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, and the air smelled of wet earth and leaves. I sat on the bench under the old maple tree, the same bench where I used to drink coffee in the mornings when we first moved into the house. It used to be a place of comfort. Now it felt like neutral ground. A place between what my life had been and what it was becoming. After a while, I heard the screen door open and close gently behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. His footsteps were soft, but distinct. I could feel him before I heard him. He didn't sit down right away. He stood nearby, maybe unsure of what to say or if he should say anything at all. The quiet stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but charged. I used to sit out here a lot, I said finally. My voice sounded strange in the open air. Before. When everything still felt new. There was a pause before he responded. I didn't know that. It was a good kind of quiet back then. I paused, glancing up at the sky. Now it feels heavier. He didn't respond right away. Then, carefully, he sat on the far end of the bench. There was a solid space between us, not enough to be distant, but enough to remind us where we stood. We didn't speak again for several minutes. And still, it felt like the most honest conversation I'd had in years. I looked at him finally. He was staring ahead, his expression thoughtful, almost guarded. There was no pretense in him. No performance. And in that moment, I felt something shift again. Not in a dramatic, sweeping way, but something small. Something real. When I stood up to go back inside, he rose too. We walked back toward the house in silence. Just before we reached the door, he stopped. I turned, and our eyes met. We kissed. Just that. No words. No movement beyond the moment. Then I walked inside without another glance, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the sound of the latch clicking into place louder than it should have been. The house was still. Completely still. But inside, I wasn't. Everything had changed. And nothing had. Both things were true. And I didn't know which one frightened me more. The morning after felt like stepping into a world where everything had shifted, but no one had spoken it aloud. I woke up before the sun, as I usually did, but something in me refused to move. I lay still, eyes wide open, the ceiling above me unfamiliar in its silence. It wasn't the ceiling that had changed, of course, it was me. Or maybe it was everything else. The kiss from the night before looped in my mind like a quiet storm. It hadn't been reckless or desperate. It had been still. Intentional. And maybe that was what frightened me the most. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't confusing. It felt inevitable, like a page being turned after too long being held shut. My husband had returned late the previous night. I heard him move around the house while I pretended to be asleep. I listened to the creak of the floorboards as he passed our bedroom door, the slow zip of his suitcase opening in the hallway, the faint clatter of shoes being kicked aside. No one said anything. He didn't peek into the room or whisper a quiet hello. I didn't reach out. Our silence was rehearsed by now, habitual, like everything else between us. By the time I stepped into the kitchen, the sun had begun its steady climb, casting light across the countertops. He was already gone. A note sat near the coffee pot, meetings all day. Don't wait for dinner. I stared at the note longer than I should have. The handwriting was still the same after all these years. Sharp, precise. No warmth. No curves. Just black ink and obligation. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the drawer with the takeout menus. It didn't belong anywhere else. He entered the kitchen just as I was reaching for the coffee. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept either, though his face carried a calm I didn't feel. He didn't speak, not at first. Instead, he opened the fridge and retrieved a bottle of water, his movements slow, deliberate. I was aware of every motion, every breath he took, every inch of space between us. We moved around each other in silence, neither one reaching out, neither one retreating. The air was heavy with everything we didn't say. Eventually, he looked up, our eyes locking briefly. And in that moment, the memory returned with force. We kissed. That was all. A single sentence echoing in my mind. There had been no follow-up, no awkward explanation, no stumbling apology. I had walked away, and he had let me. But now, here we were again, orbiting each other carefully, pretending nothing had happened while knowing everything had. I'm going to the library later, I said finally, just to hear something break the quiet. My voice sounded steadier than I expected. He nodded, drinking from the bottle. That sounds good. I wasn't sure why I said it. I hadn't planned to go anywhere. But after he left the kitchen, I found myself upstairs, changing clothes, brushing my hair with unusual care, adding a hint of lipstick. I didn't know what I was doing. Or maybe I did and just didn't want to admit it. The day outside was overcast, and the air smelled like damp leaves. I drove aimlessly for a while, windows slightly open, letting the breeze sting my skin. I didn't go to the library. I couldn't sit still in silence surrounded by strangers. Instead, I parked near the lake, the same one we had driven past countless times over the years but never stopped at. I got out of the car and walked to the water's edge. The surface was calm, interrupted only by the occasional ripple. I stood there for what felt like an hour, watching, breathing. I hadn't realized how much I missed the sound of wind in the trees, the scent of water and earth. It reminded me of a time when I still believed things could change just because I wanted them to. When I finally returned home, the house was empty again. He had gone out, maybe for a walk, maybe just to escape the walls that had grown too tight. I didn't ask. I moved through the house in a daze, picking up forgotten mugs, folding the throw blanket over the couch, adjusting a vase that hadn't moved in weeks. Everything needed to be touched, straightened, softened. Hours later, I heard the door open. I was in the living room, the television on low, not really watching. He entered without speaking, his eyes meeting mine in a way that was neither forced nor fleeting. There was no tension this time, only a quiet understanding. I stood, my heart pacing faster than it should, and walked toward him. He didn't move. I stopped a few steps away, unsure, my hands trembling slightly. We kissed. There was no hesitation. No rush. Just a moment held between two people standing on opposite sides of a line they had already crossed. When we stepped apart, the silence wasn't awkward. It was full. Like something had been said without words. I turned away first and walked back into the kitchen, my breath shallow, my thoughts a blur. I busied myself with the kettle, needing the motion, the distraction. My hands shook slightly as I filled it with water. He didn't follow. Not at first. Eventually, I heard his footsteps behind me. Slow. Steady. But he didn't say a word. We didn't need to. That night, my husband came home late again. I heard him move through the house, the faint sound of his suitcase being wheeled through the hallway. I listened from the bed, eyes closed, body still. He entered the room quietly, careful not to disturb me. He thought I was asleep. I wasn't. When the lights went out, I stared at the ceiling for hours, the image of the lake still etched behind my eyes, the feel of that kiss still on my skin. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt in the way I expected. There was a heaviness, yes, but it wasn't shame. It was the weight of recognition. Something had shifted, and there was no returning to before. The house remained quiet, the same rooms, the same routines, but something in me had changed. Something essential. And I knew, even if no one else did, that a choice was coming. And I wasn't ready to make it. Not yet. But soon. The days that followed took on a muted rhythm, as though the entire house had settled into a silent agreement not to speak about anything too real. The silence no longer felt like avoidance, it felt like protection. Like if we spoke too clearly, too truthfully, everything might collapse under the weight of what we said aloud. So we all carried on, carefully navigating our routines, brushing past each other with quiet nods and half-smiles, like actors in a play too familiar to need a script. My husband continued with his work, his long meetings, his late evenings out. He left notes, messages, calendar updates on the fridge. Everything was accounted for. Everything scheduled. Our conversations had narrowed to essentials, groceries, appointments, reminders. I no longer felt guilty for how little we spoke. If he noticed my absence even when I was in the same room, he said nothing. I suppose it's easy not to miss something you've already forgotten how to see. The weather shifted again. Warmer mornings began creeping in, the sun rising earlier each day, casting long golden lines across the kitchen floor before I'd even started the coffee. It gave the illusion of newness, of possibility, but beneath it, nothing had changed. Or rather, everything had, and none of us knew what to do with that truth. It was my husband's idea to take a short trip. A change of scenery might be good, he said one evening over dinner. His fork scraped against the plate, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "You've seemed tired. You and he could drive up to the lakeside. Get a few days of air. I'll catch up with you over the weekend." I didn't answer right away. I glanced at him across the table, searching his face for some hint of irony or hesitation, but found none. His tone was casual, almost kind. Not generous, not thoughtful. Just procedural. As if he were offering a prescription for mild fatigue. He continued eating, waiting for my response without pressure. That's what struck me most, how certain he seemed that I would agree. And I did. I nodded, carefully placing my fork beside the plate. "That sounds fine." I expected to feel something afterward. Anticipation, dread, guilt, anything. But all I felt was stillness. Not peace. Not calm. Just the absence of motion, the sense that time had paused somewhere inside me. We left 2 days later. My stepson offered to drive. He loaded the bags into the trunk while I checked the windows and locks one last time, my movements automatic. When I slid into the passenger seat, he looked over at me briefly, just a glance, then started the engine without a word. The drive north was mostly quiet. Trees lined both sides of the highway, their leaves flickering silver and green in the wind. I watched them blare past, letting my thoughts drift with them. Occasionally, he would ask if I was comfortable, if I needed anything. I always answered with a soft no, "I'm fine," and he always nodded without pushing further. We arrived in the late afternoon. The cabin was small but clean, tucked between tall pine trees with a narrow path leading down to the lake. It looked untouched, like it had been waiting for us and only us. The air smelled of moss and old wood, of water and soil. I stepped out of the car and took a long breath, feeling something inside me loosen for the first time in weeks. Inside, there were 2 bedrooms, each with a small window and a single dresser. A tiny kitchen sat off the main room, which held a modest sofa and a fireplace stacked with dry wood. Everything was simple, quiet, unassuming. We didn't talk much as we unpacked. I took the room on the right, he took the one on the left. We moved through the space like travelers, familiar with each other's presence but not entirely sure how to behave in a place that was neither home nor escape. That evening, we sat outside on the small wooden deck overlooking the lake. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the water. I sipped tea while he leaned back in one of the chairs, arms resting behind his head, eyes on the sky. We didn't say much. Just the occasional comment about the colors in the sunset or the sudden breeze that rolled in off the water. But even in the silence, something passed between us. Not urgency. Not longing. Something quieter, something waiting. I found myself watching him more openly now. There was no need to be subtle here. No one to observe us, no other presence shaping our behavior. His posture, relaxed but alert. The small lines that had begun to form at the edges of his eyes. The way he didn't fill the space with noise but allowed the silence to exist without fear. After a while, he turned to look at me. It wasn't dramatic, not a meaningful stare or a questioning glance. Just a soft, steady gaze that met mine and held it. There was no need to speak. We kissed. That was it. Nothing more. No follow-up. No promise. Just a single act held gently in the quiet between us. Afterward, I stood and went inside, my hands trembling just slightly as I poured myself another cup of tea. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Something had settled in the air between us, something undeniable but not demanding. Later, as I lay in bed, the sound of the lake brushing against the shore filled the room through the open window. I stared at the ceiling, the soft glow of the moon casting faint patterns across the walls. There was no guilt. No fear. only the awareness that something had changed permanently. I didn't know what the next day would bring. I didn't know what would happen when we returned home or what story we would pretend to tell. But here, in this cabin, on this lake, we had stepped into something that couldn't be undone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. The days at the cabin blurred together, as though time itself had slowed. The routine of each morning felt like an echo of the last, and the same quiet rhythm persisted. We woke up, ate breakfast together, and then found something to do, whether it was a walk by the lake or simply sitting in the living room, reading, lost in our separate worlds. The silence between us had shifted from something charged with tension to something almost normal. But it wasn't normal. Nothing about it was. The awareness was still there, hanging in the background of every glance, every movement, though neither of us acknowledged it outright. I found myself looking at him more often than I had before, studying the way his face softened when he was lost in thought, the way his hands rested casually on the table when he ate, the way he held his gaze a little longer than necessary when our eyes met. Sometimes, I would catch him looking at me too, his eyes steady, never hurried, as if he was trying to understand something he couldn't quite put into words. I didn't know what he saw when he looked at me, but I knew what I saw in him, something complex, something unfamiliar. He wasn't just my stepson anymore. He was someone else, someone I couldn't define, someone whose presence now seemed woven into the fabric of this place, of this strange, suspended moment we had created for ourselves. One afternoon, we went for a walk in the woods surrounding the cabin. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. We didn't speak much. The path was narrow, winding, and we walked side by side, our footsteps soft against the earth. The air smelled fresh, sharp with the scent of pine and wet leaves, and I couldn't help but take deep breaths, as if trying to fill myself with something I had been missing for a long time. Every so often, he would point out something, a bird in the distance, a trail of ants working together, a stone that had been turned over by the animals. Small observations that seemed to fill the silence between us, but never did. The silence was too thick, too dense for the small things to matter, no matter how much we tried to fill it with our words. I wasn't sure what I was doing anymore. Was I here to get away? To clear my head? Or was it simply because I couldn't face going back home, back to the life that was beginning to feel so unfamiliar, so distant? I couldn't name it. And I wasn't sure I wanted to. We stopped near the edge of the woods, where the trees gave way to a small clearing. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting the world in golden light. He sat down on a fallen log, his legs stretched out before him, and for a long time, we said nothing. I stood beside him, looking out at the open space, my thoughts moving in directions I couldn't track. "I'm not sure what we're doing here," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "Neither am I," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. He wasn't asking a question. He wasn't seeking answers. It was a statement, an acknowledgement of the strange thing that had unfolded between us, an acknowledgement that neither of us had the answers to. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything is fine," I said, my voice faltering slightly. "Like this isn't happening. Like none of it matters." He didn't reply right away. He just sat there, looking at me, his eyes soft. The kind of gaze that didn't rush, didn't try to fill the silence with unnecessary words. I didn't know if it was pity in his eyes or understanding, but it made me feel vulnerable in a way I wasn't sure I was ready for. I wanted him to say something, to tell me I wasn't crazy, that this wasn't as strange as it felt. But he didn't. He just sat there, letting the moment stretch on without intervening. "I don't know how we got here," I continued, more to myself than to him. "I don't know what happened to us. What happened to me. But it feels like everything is broken. And I can't fix it. His gaze didn't falter, but he shifted slightly, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Maybe some things don't need fixing," he said softly. I wasn't sure what that meant. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. I wanted to believe that if we just tried harder, if we just pretended everything was fine, we could go back to the way things were. But I knew we couldn't. I knew that what had happened, the moments we had shared, the unspoken things we had allowed to unfold, had changed something irreversibly. The walk back to the cabin was silent. I didn't know what to say, and neither did he. When we returned, the evening had already settled in, the air cool, the sky painted with streaks of purple and orange. We went inside, neither of us looking at each other, both of us pretending the other hadn't just opened a door neither of us could close. That night, as I lay in bed, I could feel the weight of everything pressing in on me. The cabin, the lake, the trees outside, all of it felt like a dream, an illusion. The real world was out there, waiting for us to return to it. But the question that kept rising in my mind was whether I could ever return to it in the same way. I hadn't meant for things to get this complicated. I hadn't meant for this trip, this moment, to become a turning point. But it had. And now, with the quiet of the cabin pressing in around me, with the memories of everything we had already shared, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer we could keep pretending. The silence between us was no longer the absence of words. It had become something else, a space that was filled with understanding and questions and regrets. But it wasn't a silence I could escape. It was the kind of silence that echoed in everything we did, in every glance we shared, in every moment we spent together. And for the first time, I realized that silence might be all we had left. The days stretched on in a strange, unspoken limbo. The silence between us had become more than just something we avoided, it had become a constant, a presence we moved around like the furniture in a room that didn't need to be rearranged. The cabin had offered a temporary reprieve, a place to let our lives slow down and settle, but now it felt like it was closing in on us, like the walls were shrinking with every passing moment. I spent my mornings wandering the woods, or sitting by the lake, staring at the water. The stillness of it was the only thing that made sense. I didn't know what I was searching for. Maybe I was hoping that by losing myself in the quiet of nature, I could also lose the nagging feeling of knowing how deeply things had changed. But no matter where I went, the truth followed. My stepson remained an enigma. He seemed content to let things be, never pushing for answers, never forcing a conversation that neither of us was ready to have. He'd slip into the kitchen to make breakfast or return to his room without a word. But every time our paths crossed, there was that same quiet awareness between us. It was always there, like an undercurrent that neither of us was willing to acknowledge, but both of us felt. By the third day, I couldn't pretend anymore. The air in the cabin felt thick, as if everything was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I knew I couldn't stay in this suspended state much longer. I didn't know what would happen when the moment arrived, but I knew it was inevitable. It was the unspoken truth we had all been dancing around. That evening, as the sky outside darkened and the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, I found myself sitting by the fireplace. The room was dim, the only light coming from the flickering flames that cast long shadows on the walls. I hadn't noticed how long I'd been sitting there until I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, and there he was, standing in the doorway. My stepson. His presence was always steady, unhurried, but now there was something different in the way he looked at me. I could feel his eyes on me before he even spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, but there was a quiet intensity to it. He didn't wait for me to answer. Instead, he walked into the room and took a seat across from me, near the fire, his gaze never leaving mine. "I don't know," I said, the words coming out more honestly than I had meant. "I don't know what's happening anymore. I don't know if I even understand it myself." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, as if he was weighing his next words carefully. The silence stretched between us, heavy and thick, but not uncomfortable. There was no judgment in his gaze, no expectation. Just a quiet understanding, as though he too had been waiting for this moment to arrive. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," he said quietly. "Maybe you just need to let it be for a while." I wanted to ask him what he meant, to demand some kind of explanation, but I knew it wouldn't help. The question that had been gnawing at me for days was too big for words. What had happened between us? What was this strange connection that had formed, unspoken and undeniable? "I think I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of what it means. What it says about me. What it says about us." He was quiet for a long moment, and for a second, I thought he might not say anything at all. But then he spoke again, his voice softer than before, almost reluctant. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "You don't have to make sense of everything right away. Sometimes, it's okay to just be." The simplicity of his words hit me harder than I expected. It was almost as if he was giving me permission, as though he could see the weight of everything I had been carrying, even though I hadn't shared it with him. His presence was steady, unwavering, and in that moment, I realized something. We were both standing at the edge of something, both of us hovering on the precipice, unsure of what lay beyond. I took a deep breath and looked away, the firelight dancing in my peripheral vision. There was no easy answer. I couldn't fix this. I couldn't undo what had already happened. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to. "I don't know if I can keep pretending," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't know how to go back." He didn't say anything. He just sat there, watching me, his gaze gentle but steady. It was like he understood that sometimes, there was no going back. That once a door was opened, once something was acknowledged, it couldn't simply be forgotten. "I don't want to pretend," he said quietly, almost to himself, as if he were talking more to his own thoughts than to me. I didn't know what to say to that. The words were too complex, too heavy, for anything I could offer in response. But we both knew the truth. The space between us had shifted in ways neither of us could have predicted, and now we had to navigate it, whatever that meant. The hours stretched on, and eventually, the tension in the room seemed to dissolve into the quiet. We didn't speak again that night. Instead, we simply sat there, the soft crackling of the fire filling the spaces between us, both of us lost in our own thoughts, but somehow, still present with each other. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. My stepson had already gone out for a walk, leaving no trace of his presence except for the slight disarray in the kitchen, where he had been preparing breakfast. I moved through the house slowly, the silence pressing in on me, the weight of everything we hadn't yet addressed hanging like a shadow in the air. When he returned a few hours later, I was sitting by the window, looking out at the trees. He didn't say anything, just stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. I didn't look back. Instead, I kept my eyes on the outside world, as though I could find some clarity there. But I knew better. "I think it's time to go home," I said quietly, finally breaking the silence. "I think it's time we all went back." He didn't respond right away, but I felt him step closer. He didn't need to say anything more. The words had already been spoken, and somehow, I knew we both understood that there was no going back to how things had been before. We were on the edge now, and all we could do was decide what came next. And that, in itself, was the hardest part. The drive back to the city was a quiet one. There was nothing in the air that signaled a change, nothing that suggested things would ever be the same again. The trip had started with so much unspoken weight, with the belief that time away from the familiar would give us clarity. But the clarity never came. Instead, we were left with the same quiet tension we had carried before, now just more noticeable. Like a shadow we couldn't outrun. I kept my eyes on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel. The familiarity of the highway stretched out before me, 1,000 miles of asphalt between here and home. And yet, in my mind, everything felt like it had shifted. The world outside seemed unchanged, green fields, trees, and the occasional farmhouse. But inside the car, everything was different. My stepson sat beside me, his posture still as ever, his eyes focused somewhere out the window. I wanted to say something, to fill the space with noise, but I didn't. What could I say? Words had become fragile, hollow. We had already said too much without saying anything at all. The silence between us was no longer something we could ignore. It had become a tangible presence, like a knot we couldn't untangle. When I looked at him, I saw something new in his eyes. Not just the quiet boy I had known, but something older, something that mirrored my own confusion. He was trying to make sense of what had happened, too. But neither of us was ready to speak about it. We passed the turnoff to the house, my house, our house, and for a moment, I thought about taking the exit, driving off somewhere else. Maybe back to the cabin. Maybe anywhere but here. But I didn't. I couldn't. I had made my choice the moment I turned the key in the ignition. It wasn't long before we reached the city, and the familiar skyline loomed ahead. The lights of the buildings, the bustle of traffic, the sounds of life returning, it all seemed so foreign now. How had I let myself become so disconnected from the life I had built here? When we arrived at the house, I parked the car in the driveway and turned off the engine. The house loomed in front of me, silent, waiting. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to face the reality of being back, of confronting everything that had happened in those few days. But I knew there was no avoiding it. There was no hiding from what had transpired. I got out of the car first and walked up the porch steps, the familiar creak of the wood beneath my feet somehow louder than I remembered. The door was locked, and I hesitated before unlocking it. I knew what awaited inside, the emptiness, the things left unsaid, the unspoken truths we had been carrying for so long. When I opened the door, the house greeted me with its usual stillness. It felt colder than it had before, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing through the hallway. Behind me, my stepson entered, his presence quiet but unmistakable. We didn't need to say anything to acknowledge each other. We both understood that this wasn't just about the house. It was about everything that had changed while we were away, everything that had shifted and redefined itself without us even realizing it. I went into the kitchen to put the bags down. It felt strange being here again, after everything that had happened. The kitchen, once a place of comfort and routine, now seemed too small, too confining. I could almost feel the space between us stretching out. My thoughts were a jumble of confusion, regret, and something else, something I couldn't name. I didn't want to name it. He stood in the doorway, watching me. His eyes never left me, not even as I turned to face him. For a moment, we just stood there, silent. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't easy either. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We need to talk," I said, the words heavy in the air between us. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know what I needed to hear. But it was a starting point. A beginning of something we both knew was inevitable. He nodded, his gaze steady. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. We both knew what was coming. I sat down at the table, motioning for him to sit across from me. The silence stretched again, like a thread between us, waiting to snap. But neither of us moved to break it. Finally, I spoke. "I don't know what this is anymore. I don't know what to do with what's happened." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the table, and met my gaze. Neither do I, he said, his voice quiet but clear. But I know it can't just be ignored. We can't pretend it doesn't matter. I nodded, my chest tightening. I don't want to ignore it. But I don't know how to handle it. How do we just move on? We can't go back, he said, his voice firm. But we don't have to keep pretending like nothing happened either. We just have to figure out what comes next. It was the first time we had spoken so plainly, so directly. I had always known that we couldn't go back to what we were before, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel real. There was no going back. I'm scared, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I'm scared of what this means. What it says about me. About us. I'm scared too, he said, his eyes never leaving mine. But maybe that's just part of it. Part of moving forward. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make it all feel less complicated, less messy. But the truth was, there was no easy answer. There was no quick fix for the space that had opened between us. We had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And now, we had to find our way through it. I don't know how we move forward, I said softly, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay composed. But I do know that we can't stay here. We can't just live in this limbo forever. He nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. We'll figure it out, he said. I wasn't sure how. I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew we couldn't stay in this moment forever. We had to move forward, whatever that meant. As we sat there, the silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't filled with the same heaviness it had been before. It was a space we both shared, a space we could choose to fill with whatever came next. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe we could figure it out. Maybe we could find a way forward. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. It couldn't be. Because nothing about this had been easy. The morning light spilled through the blinds, a quiet invitation to the new day, but nothing felt new. The house was still silent. The familiar hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, everything seemed unchanged. And yet, beneath it all, nothing was the same. I could feel the difference in the air, in the way the walls pressed in around me, in the way my steps felt heavier, more deliberate. My stepson was still in the house. The absence of my husband was oddly comforting, a quiet void that allowed us to exist together without needing to explain ourselves. It wasn't that I wanted him gone, but there was something about the absence of his presence that gave us room to breathe, room to finally be. But that room was small. And the more we occupied it, the more it became clear that the space we had created was fragile. It could crumble at any moment if we weren't careful. I moved through the house, performing the same small tasks that had become part of my routine. I put away the dishes, dusted the surfaces, adjusted the curtains as the sun rose higher. I was trying to ignore the gnawing uncertainty at the edges of my thoughts, but it wasn't working. I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Every look, every touch, every word unsaid. It was all still there, like a thread that refused to break. At some point, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the garden. It was still early, but the air had already begun to warm, the promise of summer lingering in the breeze. I watched the flowers sway in the wind, the gentle rustling of leaves. It should have been peaceful, but I couldn't feel it. My mind was too full, too cluttered with things I didn't know how to process. I wasn't sure how much time had passed when I heard the front door open. I didn't need to look to know who it was. My stepson had been spending more time outside lately, taking long walks by the river or sitting on the porch, lost in his thoughts. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I could guess. The same thing I had been thinking. The same thing we had both been avoiding. I turned away from the window, my gaze shifting to the hallway as I heard him approach. He didn't say anything at first, but I could feel him there, just beyond the threshold of the room. His presence was always steady, always quiet, but there was something about him now that felt different. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, it was something else. A shift in the air between us, like the tension before a storm. "Morning," he said, his voice calm but not as casual as usual. "Morning," I replied, my voice sounding thinner than I intended. I tried to steady myself, but the weight of the moment was starting to press down on me. He stood there for a moment, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, without saying anything else, he stepped further into the room, his footsteps light but purposeful. I could feel the space between us closing, and I didn't know what to do with that. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone quieter now, more thoughtful. "Maybe we should talk. About everything." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What was there left to say? Everything had already been said in the silence. Everything had already been acknowledged without being spoken. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I admitted, my voice betraying the hesitation I had been trying to hide. "I don't know if I can put everything into words yet." He didn't push. Instead, he walked over to the window, standing beside me. We both looked out at the garden, our eyes following the movement of the trees, the birds flying overhead. The scene was peaceful, so simple, so normal. But it didn't feel that way to me. Nothing about this felt simple. "We don't have to figure everything out today," he said, his words soft, almost hesitant. "We don't have to have all the answers. I just think, maybe it's time we stop pretending that nothing has changed." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside of me. He was right. We couldn't pretend anymore. The truth was, things had changed. And even though neither of us wanted to admit it, we had both been living in that space between knowing and not knowing, trying to navigate a reality that had shifted beneath us. "I know," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I know things have changed. But I don't know how to move forward. I don't know what the next step is." He turned to look at me then, his expression open but not without its own vulnerability. "We don't have to know right now. We can figure it out. Together." The simplicity of his words hit me harder than I expected. Together was the key. It was the thing that had been missing all along. For so long, I had been carrying everything on my own, trying to make sense of it without anyone to share the burden. But in that moment, with him standing beside me, I realized that I didn't have to do this alone. I didn't have to carry the weight of everything by myself. But that didn't mean it was going to be easy. Moving forward would be difficult. It would require more honesty than I had ever been ready for. It would require facing the things we had been avoiding and understanding the implications of what had happened. And I didn't know if I was strong enough for that. "I'm scared," I admitted, finally looking at him. "I'm scared of what this means. What it says about me. About us." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. He reached out slowly, as if giving me the space to pull away if I wanted to. But I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. He placed his hand gently on mine, his touch warm but not demanding. "You don't have to be scared," he said softly. "We'll figure it out. Together." The weight in my chest didn't disappear, but it lightened a little. The road ahead was uncertain, full of obstacles I couldn't yet see. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't alone on that road. We were standing side by side, both uncertain, both unsure, but both willing to move forward. And that, in itself, felt like enough for now. We stood there, in silence, for a while longer. The sound of the wind outside, the rustling of leaves, filled the space between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just the quiet of two people trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to understand what came next. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to